Smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity. And make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste, the therapist. Let's go.
Hi, beautiful people. If you've never been in here before, thank you for being here. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. I come on, I talk to people who are doing things to empower the lives of others through sharing their story. And the goal behind this podcast is to help you shift the way you think. So before we get started, I wanted to tell you about two things. So the first thing I want to tell you about is this community that I have created called Shifting the Way You Think. And I'm going to go to the actual website. I'm going to go to the website. So this is, if you go to Shifting the Way You Think right now, well, not right now, but if you go there, for people listening to the audio, you can go right now. If you're watching, obviously just stay here. It's a 3-month membership based community designed to move you forward with creating life changes that's going to stick. And the goal behind this is to give you information in small doses. So there's going to be weekly homework assignments, video sent straight to your phone or email. Every month, there's going to be a live class with questions and answers and some how-to practical steps to guide you along the way. Currently, there are 2 classes. The first class is Healing the Inner Child. And the second class is all about love. Both of those classes are really powerful. I believe that a lot of times we tend to look at life from our trauma lens and we find ourselves struggling because of it. So the class is only available, or the open enrollment only happens 4 times a year. The reason why it's only 4 times a year is because it does require a 3-month commitment. So there's no ongoing enrollment. So the 4 times that the enrollment takes place is January, April, July, and September. And these are the 2 books that we are coming from, depending on which class you decide to take. The first one is Healing the Inner Child. And the second one is called All About Love. So those are the 2 that are available for uh, for you to be a part of. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is the PEP. So for people that are following me, whether you're following me on Facebook, Periscope, YouTube, if you are watching me on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe and like this video. So people that are following me there, if you want to always be up to date and see kind of like what I post. If you follow me on all my mental health pages, I only post things pertaining to mental health. And if you want to get your daily dose of mental health and may not always get to see my content, you can follow me on the PEP. And so this next this next ad by Romney is going to tell you like what the PEP is. So I'm going to play that, and then I'm going to bring on my special guest. So let's hear about the PEP.
Pager Lite. That's Lite in Google Play in the App Store. PEP Pager Lite. Follow me on the PEP, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because I get so many people complaining that they're not getting notifications when I go live or when I post a video or whatever the case is. I decided I would just notify myself, so I created a notification app called the PEP. It's called PEP Pager Lite, Lite. If you want to see what a black man's app looks like, go to Google Play or the App Store and download it. Follow me on there, and you'll get notifications when I'm going live. You get notifications when I give stuff away. You get notifications when I post videos.
This is my page. If you go there, you can find my page.
Hey, yes. Cool thing about the PEP is text messaging and emails are invasive. That's why people give you fake email addresses. Having the PEP, it's called PEP Pager Lite because it's just a pager. Literally, you just receive a buzz, and it's like, oh, look, Celeste posted something. Let me see what it is. Takes you directly to the post. When I'm done with the post, I make my comment or whatever, and I go right back into the app and proceed to see whatever notifications I have.
Bam, just like that. So that's the PEP, and that's a free app that's available to anybody if you're a content creator and you're tired of the way the algorithm's set up, or you really want people who follow you to kind of know what's going on. That's an easy way to do it, where it kind of sends them an alert, just like a pager. It's a pretty cool app. So if you go to Pep Pager Light, you can find that. So I'm so excited to bring on my special guest. I'm going to add him to the stream right now. And then I'm going to have him introduce himself to you all. Let me find my right box. I got so many boxes over here. I need to clear them out. Hey, Crystal. Hey, Miss P Love. Hey, Derek. Hey, everybody. So can you introduce yourself to the people, please?
Yeah, my name is Krispin Mayfield, and I'm a therapist in Portland, Oregon. And I have a special interest in attachment science and spirituality. I work with couples. I've been working in the realm of ADHD for 4.5 years now. But I really love attachment science and connection and relationships, and all that. And basically I'm the couples therapist at our clinic. So I'm like living in that world. And then really, like, as I was studying the science of relationships, I was like, oh my gosh, this has so many implications about how we relate to God. And that's kind of like whether or not, like, you, like, whatever tradition you grew up in, if you have some like spiritual concept like that is playing in your brain in the way that you view yourself and the way that you view God on the day to day. So
Thank you for that introduction. What's in Oregon? I've never been out there. Is it worth going out there to visit for a trip?
yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, so there's that. It rains all the time. And yeah, I guess those are like the two things, we yeah, we had a lot of
Crispin, you got to talk it up a little bit more. I want to come see you. You got to tell me a little bit
right.
more.
I lived in Minneapolis for 3 years, and I hated the weather there, but I did love the community. And I'm gonna hate on my hometown, but I love the community in Minneapolis a lot more than here. I'll just say that outright. So
Well, I'm really happy to have you. So I really want to understand this idea behind attachment science that you bring up. Just a little
yeah.
bit about me. Like, I grew up in church, and I feel like the relationship that I was kind of taught to have with God was more done on autopilot, meaning like it was something that you had to do, right? It felt more um, like disciplinary. It didn't feel like anything that was action oriented. When I look back at the church I grew up in, I remember it thinking like how dead it felt. Uh,
Mm.
as an adult, I've changed so much into thinking more about my spirituality and my relationship in that way. I'm very action oriented, which
Mm.
feels a little bit different than the way that I grew up. So I'm always like fascinated to talk to people that
Mm.
kind of really you're in your bag when it comes to your spirituality and thinking about this relationship with God. So tell me a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah, so I grew up in the church, and for me it was always like my relationship with God was like God was always like looking down on you, making sure like you're doing the right thing. God is always disappointed in you, like you got to try harder. And this idea of like if you behave well, then you're close to God, and if you don't behave well, then you're far.
And
Um,
the problem with that is that when things go wrong, whatever you're struggling with, you start to think, well, what am I doing wrong? Right? When
mhm.
you have that kind of
Right.
mindset.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, because it's like, yeah, God's in control of everything. And so yeah, I must be like offending God if things in my life are going poorly.
Right.
And what's interesting is that there's a lot of psychological literature that shows that people that have a spirituality and have a relationship with God, or have a religion that they practice, that can be a really big asset and a really big positive thing in their life towards mental health. And that makes sense. If you have this sense that God is there with you all the time and cares about you. But then there's this question, like, what if your concept of God is this being that's always like critiquing you or always like disappointed in you, right? Then it's sort of like that negative self-talk takes on like a divine voice. And that was my experience, was like, it wasn't like God was like a positive thing in my life. And I mean, God was in my life, and I went to Bible college. I was going to be a pastor. And it really was only in the last few years of reading attachment science that I'm like, oh my gosh, the way that I relate to God is dysfunctional. And the way that I was taught to relate to God. And really what we can look at is like, so just a quick rundown on attachment science. It was in the 1950s that Dr. John Bowlby started to look at orphans and kids that were separated from their parents. And, and he's like, hey, when kids are separated from their parents, they get really upset and they really like mentally decline in their mental health. And up until that point, it just was thought like kids just need, like, they need, shelter and they need food. And what he was saying is actually kids need connection. They need connection with a parent. They need someone that is going to be there for them, and they feel attached to their parents. And so then he started looking at, what does a secure relationship between a parent and child look like? And then what does an insecure relationship look like? And that has so many implications for mental health when we look at that through an attachment lens. And that's what I do with couples, is I look at like, what, is your relationship secure or insecure? How do we get to that secure place? But then I was looking at, okay, so what does it mean to have a secure relationship with God? So kids that feel secure in their relationship, they know, right? Mom and dad might be upset with me about doing this or that, but I know that like I can still come to them if I need them. I can count on them, right? It's not like I'm going to do the wrong thing and then my dad doesn't talk to me for 2 days, right? That's traumatizing. But a kid that knows, like, I don't really need to worry. Like, I might screw up sometimes, but my parent is always there for me, and I can rest and I can relax. But if you grew up in the church where it's like you gotta be on your best behavior if you want a connection with God, then that's actually an anxious, ambivalent attachment style, where now you're like kind of white knuckling it and you're trying really hard to be good so that God will stay close to you. Just in the same way that like a kid that can't really count on their parent, they try to be really good so that mom or dad will love me, right? And it's heartbreaking to hear that about a kid. And the thing that research has shown is that attachment figure, that framework that we have, if we grow up and we keep that same concept of God that we've had, we're gonna keep that concept. And so that means you can be, 30 years old and still trying really hard to be good to keep God close. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, that's
The
where that intersection comes
the
in.
the part about the mental health, that makes a lot of sense. People, with depending on their type of relationship they have with their faith, positive, their mental health appears to be more positive, but it depends on the type of relationship, because a lot of people will say that I'll just say Christian, but whatever they are. And I have clients from all different faiths, and a lot of times they know what it says to do. They can repeat it verbatim, but the actual part of applying it to their life doesn't happen. How do you think one can work on creating a secure relationship, and also thinking about applying like the fundamental principles to their life? Because I don't know if it's always been kind of taught that way, when you think about the way that, you and I have talked about our understanding of it. How does one start to kind of formulate that relationship?
Yeah, so I'm specifically kind of in the Christian arena, but that being said, I would say most of the world religions, there is a component of God being love and God being loving. And I mentioned earlier that I was in Minneapolis for a while, so I had a lot of Muslim friends because there's a big Somali community there, and it's Allah the most merciful, and so this kindness. And so how do we cultivate noticing that love and kindness is, I think, really important. And a lot of old faith traditions have done that. And so you think about, I'm thinking about the Christian faith. There are these traditions, and they can feel like dead traditions sometimes, right? But also they can be this sort of neutral space in which to experience the love of God. And so for some people, what they do is they'll say, I'm going to take 10 minutes and I'm just going to meditate on that word love. And I'm going to know that God is with me and God loves me. Whereas I grew up where it was like, if you're praying, like, it's because you're supposed to hear from God, and God is going to tell you what you're supposed to do, and he's going to like convict you for the things you're doing wrong. And, like, if you think about, like, if that's your only interaction with your heavenly parent, right, just as when you're a kid, like, it doesn't feel good, right? But when, I have a 5-year-old, and when he just comes and sits on my lap, and he'll do that sometimes, just stare out the window, right? And that is where secure attachment happens. It's called a yield state, where it's like, there's nothing to do. I'm not being evaluated. There's no goal here. We're just being together. And so when we think about doing that same thing with God, there are some really great spiritual practices like that, where it's like, I don't need to do anything. I don't need to strive for anything. When we look at like what Christians would call the Old Testament, but the Torah, which the Islam, Judaism, and Christianity descends from, like, there's this Sabbath that God institutes, and God, Yahweh, says, like, this is what's going to be unique about Israel, is that they're going to rest every seventh day. We're going to just have this time to be together. And that actually fits totally with attachment, to say, like, we need a place where we can just be present and let our minds rest. And, if you've been around mental health very long, you're like, hey, that sounds like mindfulness and meditation. And I think that's basically, like, I'm not saying that it's not true, but there's a reason that these things fit together. And so having that time to just be present, and so much of the church tradition can be such a good, like, sensory holding environment for that. So being with your community and singing songs together, those sorts of things, when you can tie that to, this is what love of relationship with God is like, then that can be such a positive thing. If it's connected to negative self-talk, where you're like criticizing yourself all the time, then that's not so helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. Jerry, I'm going to put your question up in a second, but the whole mindfulness, everything that I talk about, it actually comes from the fundamentals of the way that I've learned, about God, because I took it a step further and decided to apply it to my life, right? This idea of being still and, the mindfulness piece allows me to renew my mind and my spirit. And so many times I tell people, when you're struggling spiritually, and it doesn't have to be about any extreme religion, but when you're struggling inside, you got to ask yourself, what are you actually doing on a day-to-day basis? Because a lot of it, the framework on how we live our life, tends to happen internally. So if I'm starting my day on social media, or arguing with somebody about politics or whatever it is, why wouldn't I feel so upside down inside, right? But if I take time to process, like, the things that have taken place over the day, then I can allow that stuff to be released, right? And these are the things that are literally in most religions, right? About the stillness,
Right.
but we don't apply it to our life. We just don't.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, even for me, like, the pandemic has been a time to be like, this is the time I got to start like, I have the time to do the things that I've always said I should be doing. And I think what's great is that if you can find a practice that works for you, where you feel peace, then it shifts from, like, here's this exercise or whatever I'm supposed to do, to, like, this is actually a place I can find rest and peace. And I mean, going back to that attachment part of an attachment figure, that person you feel connected to, that parent, that caregiver, is they are a refuge for you in a chaotic world. So they're the person that, when you need comfort and when you need stillness, you can go back to them and connect. but yeah, what we need to do is figure out like, how do I implement that in my life? And I think for a lot of people, spiritually, they expect that something should happen. It's like, I should feel something or something like that. And so what I find helpful is like, God, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do breathing prayer. And I'm not going to expect to feel a certain way, which again parallels totally with like meditation and mindfulness, right? But taking that time to say, this is important to me. It doesn't have to feel any particular way. It's just about me doing the rhythm of it. And
Yes.
you do find over time that then in the moments when you feel chaotic and overwhelmed, you're like, I can reach for this relationship in a way that maybe I wasn't like as available to me before.
Yes, and it's about, the rhythm and the cadence of it, because
Mhm.
eventually your mind and body has no other choice but to fall in line with the things that you're doing, right? So initially
Mhm.
you may not feel anything, it may feel pointless, but you're
Mhm.
trying to introduce a new concept. One of the questions is a really good question is, do we believe do we see people dropping off the traditional religion spectrum? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's it's such a
A
big
big
question.
question, yes. You want me to
My
start or you got this? You got this, Crispin. You
well,
got this.
let me tell you what I see. I mean, I'm in a particular. I was telling Celeste, I have an evangelical background, and that word means a lot of things.
As long as
Um,
you're not calling angels from Africa, Crispin.
right. Well, and that's the thing is, I see people. I would say like the Christianity of evangelicalism is white Christian nationalism. And so I think people are seeing that clearer and clearer. And like, Trump being elected and Christians identifying with him, I've just seen more and more people be like, I can't do this.
Are
I
you
don't.
saying that the evangelical is related to like white supremacy, or it just happens to be that a lot of evangelical Christians are white supremacists?
Well, when I say like white supremacy, I think of particularly like like a racialized society. So I don't necessarily mean like KKK, but I mean like people like Dave Ramsey would be a great example. He, is an evangelical, and he's like, people are poor because they're lazy, and so if there are groups of people in the U.S. that are poor, more poor than others, they must just be lazy, and that sort of thing. And actually, there's this book called Divided by Faith, excellent study in 2000 looking at evangelicals and their belief, whether or not they believe systemic racism exists. And what they found is that these like kind of tight knit evangelical churches, they all held this like pretty like Republican conservative ideology, which meant that they didn't know anyone that had a different experience than them. So they didn't have a frame of reference for like, oh, maybe the world is different than it is for like white middle class men.
Right.
Um, and then but it self-perpetuates, and it's actually because they have the strength of their faith and the strength of their community. We could put that in sort of a positive way of like, they have had a tight-knit community, so they were less likely to like hang out with a coworker because I'm just going to have a barbecue with my Bible study. But then you end up with this really limited view, and the study showed was that these white evangelicals were way less likely than their other white counterparts to believe in systemic racism. And there's a new book called White Too Long that just came out that kind of like
Right? Too long?
White Too Long, yeah, that updates that research and goes over that. But yeah, that's really and along. I mean, yeah, there's a lot there. But yeah, I mean, Christianity in the U.S. has always been tied up with like our white supremacist founding. So that's a my wife actually wrote. I mean, there are so many authors. The Cross and the Lynching Tree is one of my favorite books on race and Christianity in the U.S. But I will say that my wife wrote a book
You better
called
say your wife. What? Tell us about your wife. What she do? You got to
Yeah,
say
so she wrote a book called The Myth of the American Dream that came out this last year. Talking
Wow,
about
that sounds good.
evangelicalism, white evangelicals, and how the values of Jesus is, he says, I came to minister to the poor, the oppressed, those in prison, those that are sick, and yet white Christianity in America has valued just the opposite, like power, wealth, those sorts of things. So I'll do a little plug for her book, but I mean, we're talking about attachment and faith, but
No, I gotta have her on now because that
Yeah.
sounds really. It's so interesting how we, claim to be Christian-based country, but the things of the Bible are completely not
right,
what.
yeah.
So that's so interesting. Yeah, thank you
Uh-huh.
for plugging her.
Yeah, definitely. So it's all that to say, I think that there are a lot of folks, maybe it's just the people that I know, but that are like, I grew up, at least giving some benefit to this religion or whatever, consider myself a Christian. But I'm seeing, this specific brand of Christianity that's aligning themselves with Trump. And I don't want that.
Mhm. Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
curious for you.
yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people looking at it differently, looking at religion or Christianity differently. And I
Mhm.
try, as a therapist, we don't tell people what to
Right.
believe, but people that are struggling with their faith, I kind of talk to them about their spirituality and looking at
Mhm.
it more of an individual relationship and kind of the way that you're taught. I don't think we understand the mindset that we were brought up in and why we have this such like narrow-minded viewpoint on God and how we are supposed to be with him.
Mhm.
And so when things are hard, I think we struggle because then it's like, what am I doing wrong?
Mhm.
When I think it's a it's so much deeper.
Mhm.
But it can be very complicated, but I do think in stillness that we can find everything that we need.
Mhm.
But I think that with our phones and with work and everything that we do to not feel, we don't make space for stillness, which
Mhm.
continues to complicate our life.
Yeah.
um
Yeah,
I
I totally agree.
My mom is an evangelical. I see that she has limited worldview. How do you talk to people who are so extreme like that? Do you have extremists in Oregon?
Yes.
I
Yes, we
know you
do.
do.
Yeah. I mean, if you
That
know
was a
much about
rhetorical question.
Yeah, if you know anything about the establishment of Oregon. Oh, yeah. That's the question. How do you talk to people who are extreme like that? I guess the best thing that I want to say is I want to point you to the work of James Hawkins. I believe, yeah, Dr. James Hawkins. He's another EFT therapist. And he and his colleague are talking about how to have conversations across the political aisle. Dr. Hawkins is black, his colleague is white, and they're talking about how do we talk about race together. And they're using a therapy model in emotionally focused therapy to like, how do we have these conversations? So I'll totally get you a link to some of his stuff and we can put that in there. I don't know if I'm just like passing the buck, but
You're
it's
not.
it's really hard. Uh, the thing that I've done in my personal life, when it comes to the evangelicals that I know, is I try to find the book that is gonna change their mind a little bit, or the movie that's gonna change their mind a little bit. And so and then maybe even watch it together, right? So can we watch Just Mercy together and talk about the movie, right? Or can we read this book together and talk about it as we go? And because I think it's through story that things change. And we're creatures that love story. And so I think that there's a lot to be said for like setting boundaries and saying like this isn't okay, or like this doesn't match up to what you say your faith believes, or whatever it is. But what I've also found is at the end, like those things, it just people can't hear it. So I think it's legitimate to say those things, but it's not effective often.
Yeah, and they can't hear it because of what you said earlier. When you are only based in your community, you have a very limited view on people that are outside of,
Right.
what you know to be true. And
Mhm.
and another advice I would just kind of give is for people that are struggling with people in their lives that with these extreme viewpoints is remembering that a conversation can't change however old they are years of experience. So
Mhm.
trying not to get too emotionally involved in it
Mhm.
because it can be draining and taxing on your mental health. So it's
Mhm.
important to really remind yourself that it takes time
Mhm.
for people to kind of change.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. I just want to add in there. I have a friend another therapist, who talks about, her name's Connie Baker, and she talks about how you kind of have to like run the logistics in your head about like, what's the likelihood I'm going to change? Am I going to change this person? How important is this person to me? How much energy is this going to take? Am I going to spend, this is me. Am I going to spend all morning fighting with my wife's great uncle on Facebook and then not be able to be present for my clients in the way that I want to? Or am I going to be like, you know what? Like, he's going to believe what he's going to believe, and I'm not going to I'm going to figure out where can I spend my energy.
yes.
And I think it's not a question of like, especially I would say like as someone of like with certain power and privilege, like I need to be thinking about like, how am I working towards justice? But
Yeah.
am I doing it on Facebook, or am I looking at like, what are ways in Portland that I can invest in making sure that mental health is more equitable,
Mhm,
you
mhm.
know? And I
That's
think the
good.
second one is more important. So
It is, right. It is. I tell people that, social media is social media, and people
mhm,
are doing work outside of social media. And speaking of that, the pandemic happens,
mhm,
everything gets shut down. But then in the middle of the pandemic, there's this really overt racism that we start to see
mhm,
in the US. Tell
mhm,
me about, because I know you took a break from your podcast around that time. When you came
mhm,
back on the episode, you kind of talked about you really wanted to kind of focus on um,
mhm.
Portland, Oregon, right?
Right,
So tell
yeah.
me what happened in your mind or in your life during this time?
Yeah, I think for one, just I wanted to take a break because there was just a lot of other things that I think that I thought were worth listening to and working through, and then yeah, just personally figuring out like what that looks like. I'm part of like the generally white evangelical community in Portland, and so my wife and I, and my wife is an author and speaker, and so we're talking about like, how do we, yeah, what's our role here, and what do we do? So one of the things that we did was so downtown Portland, obviously known for protests. My wife and I went down there a few times, and also just tried to figure out like, how do we yeah, I guess one answer was like our EFT community, our therapy community. We were trying to talk about like, what does equity look like? And for couples therapists, typically we just charge $120 a session cash. And if that's true, then who are the clients we're going to be able to see. And if those are the clients that, that can shell out $500 a month for therapy, like, then if you don't have access to that sort of community for your pool of clients, then who are we going to be able to invite into our EFT community? So having conversations like that, which was, our EFT community was really proactive, which I appreciated. But then protests, and then just in the church community, and how for Danielle and I, my wife and I, like, how do we support leaders of color that are doing things? And then also, like, how can we, in the community we came from, how can we be a voice, I guess, for justice? And so one of the things that we did was we went downtown and we protested this worship event by Sean Foyt. So this white dude from Bethel comes in and he's like, there are riots in Portland, but we're going to bring revival. And so people from the suburbs came in to have this worship event. And most people weren't wearing masks. and we're like, this isn't the way that justice comes, right? This is, like, Dr. King talks about the negative peace, and this is a negative peace here. This is like saying, like, if we just pray and worship, like, then the riots will go away. But, first of all, it wasn't riots. And secondly, if you're praying for protesters to go away, like, are you, but not actually wanting to see the injustice go away, like, what are you doing here? So my wife and I went down and held signs. Mine said, like, repent with me of white supremacy. And my wife's had a verse that basically is from the Old Testament, where God says, like, I don't want to hear your noisy songs. Like, I want to see justice roll down, like water. Like, I want to actually see, like, real change. And then, going down there, and it was like, it's people we knew. It's like people we went to church with that are down there worshiping, and we're like holding our signs. And so, and we're just like, this is, talking through with people, like, this is really problematic, and this isn't the way that we move forward. But I will say, it's like, it's emotionally taxing. And I mean, I'm a white dude, so I don't have to tell that to you.
No,
like,
I know.
But it's just, it really is. It's a hard place to live, and things find an equilibrium for a while, and then something happens, and it's like,
So for people listening, it sounds like you've decided to kind of talk to your community. And I tell people all the time, the way, like, we're going to change racism, a lot of it's going to, especially for people that are allies, it's going to be you talking to your community, because they know you best. And I think that, one conversation at a time is going to help kind of, like, break up some of that stuff that's going on. And even, like, within your own family, like, all of that stuff, I think it matters. And a lot of people, like, what can I do? I want to do more. And I'm like, that is a huge start. Like, that friction that you, like, to be having this sign and against people that you kind of grew up with or know really well. I think that's a huge step into the right direction. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like I feel like we want to be a part of the movement in whatever way possible, but just recognize that it takes a lot of different pieces to it, for sure.
It's not it's not going to change tomorrow. And I think it's different parts that have to be done. And eventually, like, things will look better, but it's not happening tomorrow, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah.
So I want you to tell people a little bit about your podcast, because you are very unique in what you do. So I want people to kind of, especially people that are really fascinated by this attachment science that you talk about, the way that you kind of had this awakening or aha moment is pretty fascinating. So I thought that was pretty cool. I just learned that just now.
Yeah. And I think what's really important for people, then, attachment is such a huge topic. But one of the things that's really important to understand about attachment is there are these specific categories that we operate in relationships. And so one tendency we have to do is like, you might be really clingy and you're like, are we okay? Like, I got to make sure we're okay. Like, and they also tend to be really more like demonstrative with emotions, right? Like, you're going to know what I'm feeling, and I'm upset and I expect you to be upset too. And that actually comes from this attachment style that likely came from childhood. Then there's this dismissive avoidant attachment style, which is like, what feelings? I don't have any feelings and I don't need other people. And then there's this other way of like, it's both where like I'm really worried about the relationship, but I also don't want to share what's going on inside of me. And so I'm kind of caught between like, I want to get close, but I'm afraid of getting close. And so those are three like main attachment styles. If you want to pick up the book Attached, that talks a lot about dating and attachment styles and how those things play out. So just wanted to do a little plug for like the implications of attachment science, but then we're looking.
Good. I like
Yeah,
that.
we're looking at like, so then what are the ways you relate to God? Do you like, are you really clingy and try really hard to be good? Do you like give kind of a passive, like, I'm going to learn a lot about God, but I'm not going to actually like engage? Or am I like worried that God is going to punish me and I'm just kind of wandering around all the time? Like, I kind of want to get close, but I'm afraid that God just really hates my guts. All those things can be true. And so we talk about this on the podcast, and I get a chance to interview people that are specialists in the field. And then my friend Amy, who's a licensed clinical social worker, we just kind of shoot the breeze about different topics, and she is fun and brings a lot of energy. Like earlier this month, we looked at Frozen, the movie, and we just were like, let's talk about the attachment styles that we see here. And we also talk about family system stuff as well. And that's what Amy brings to the podcast. So yeah, we talk about, if here's a healthy family system and we're operating with this idea of God as like a heavenly parent, like what's healthy and what's unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Thank you for kind of breaking down that attachment. And I think a lot of people don't even recognize consciously that how they are operating. So just kind of that little 2-minute thing you just did kind of alerts people a little bit and shakes them up. And like, and whether we're talking
Right.
about their relationship with God or their children or their
Mhm.
history, all of it. I think that it all matters so that we can start to kind of change. We have to understand what is it that we're working with. And so
Mhm.
many of us are working with a long history of trauma and of I say emotional injury, a book of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
Mhm.
A psychologist who wrote it, I can't think of her name, but she talks about this emotional injury. And so when we have a physical injury, it's easier to remember or to say out loud than that emotional injury. And I think with the attachment styles, some of them have caused grave injury to us and
Mhm.
has unfortunately shifted the way that we look at life.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's that. I mean, what we're talking about is kind of like the ways that you learn to survive. Did you learn to survive by, if as long as I cling on to mom's like skirt, at least she won't go anywhere and I won't get left, right?
Mhm.
Or like, all right, like I know that if I cry or if I'm sad, like I'm just gonna, get told, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. So I just had to like push those feelings down. And it's become so automatic now that when my wife's like, what are you feeling? I'm like, I don't know. I don't feel anything. But it was because you had to do that to survive. You had to like stuff those feelings down if
Yeah.
you're gonna like make it. So
Yeah. And you see, I have this feelings chart back here. Um, I'm such a big advocate of people just stopping and kind of saying like, how are you feeling? And, every time,
Mhm.
like before we started, I said, how are you feeling today? And I think that kind of causes us to pause, and it's important. So that we're not embodying those feelings. People think like, I don't want to say it out loud because then it's going to be real. But whether you say it out loud or not,
Right.
it's still happening inside.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of the message I really want people to kind of understand. So that was good.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What your podcast sounds amazing. Do you have any books you would recommend about attachment?
Yeah. So that book, Attached by Levine. Let me do a quick Google search. So
Yeah, so
Attached.
Crispin's clearly a podcaster because he was like,
Right. Just roll with it. Right. Yeah. So Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller is great. Especially if you're not in a committed relationship, that's a really good one. If you are in a committed relationship, Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson is a good one. I would say those are two real basic starts. And then The Attachment Effect is a third one. And The Attachment Effect is just a good overview of attachment, whereas the other two are more self-help books. So Attached, for example, looks at like, what are your automatic things that you do in dating relationships and how do you change that? Whereas The Attachment Effect is more like, a long Wikipedia article about like, how do we end up with attachment science, which I think is helpful, but depends on what you're going for.
That's good. We got a little bit of politics, a little religion, and some relationship in here. Is there anything you don't do?
That's what I think is like so important when it comes to mental health, is that there's got to be like a political component to it, right? So how we connected initially was around like, if you're stuffing down your feelings all the time, if that's the way you've learned to be in the world, then when you look at someone else's suffering, you ignore that too. And that means that you're less likely to, for example, like if you're a white person, like I don't want to look at the suffering of people, outside of my circle. Like that doesn't feel good. I can't handle those emotions. So then we come up with reasons why it's not true so that we can avoid the emotions.
That makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's why I say to people, if you don't get it by now, you really don't want to understand, because it would make you too uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
and so that makes a lot of sense what you just said
Yeah.
around why people tend to not really want to hear it out,
Mhm.
because I mean, who wants
Right.
to put themselves in a position to be uncomfortable? Nobody
Mhm.
does, right?
Right.
That's why
Yeah.
not outside of racism, and in general, we don't
Right.
want to feel like anything that causes us
Mhm.
discomfort. So it makes
Right.
sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, if we grew up with a secure attachment where it's like, if I'm sad, if I'm scared, if I'm stressed out, like I can go to my parent and they're going to be there with me, that actually builds that emotional resilience that I don't get so overwhelmed. So I like to think that, people that are like, oh, I don't have any feelings, whatever it is, really like they're just scared inside. They're scared of feeling their feelings,
We know
so
that.
which gives me like some empathy
Yeah,
for
I have
them.
it too. I'm like, I can't imagine being numb or saying like I don't feel. You do feel. You're human. You're not a robot.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm just like, wow, you're walking through life not feeling. That has to be
Mhm.
hard.
Right.
It has to be
Yeah.
hard because your emotions are going to take over and show up in different aspects of your life.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you see
Yeah.
it a lot in relationships.
Oh my gosh. Early on in my career, I did domestic violence treatment for men, and they would say like, "Oh, women are so emotional." And I'm like, "What do you think got you here?" Like, what the hell are you talking about? Anyway. Yeah.
See, now we're talking
I
about
know, we're gonna hit it
relationships.
all. Yeah. No, but it really does have these implications that go forward, and really a lot of it is like emotional intelligence, right? Like what am I feeling, and noticing like what am I feeling, what am I thinking, and when all those things are just automatically going on in the back of our brain, then we do things that aren't compassionate, or we end up just trying to survive in these ways that hurt us and hurt others. So
That's good.
yeah, so pick up a book on attachment today.
Yay. Crispin, this was good. I appreciate you taking time coming out and sharing your wide range of knowledge to my audience.
Thanks.
You guys can also check out his website. He has space where you can type in your email to get the newsletter. He sends out really thought. Are you writing it or your wife's writing it? Because it's really well
I'm
thought out.
I'm writing it. We have different writing
Okay.
styles. We try to collaborate sometimes. It doesn't go well.
It's really well. It really like shifts me a little bit. I enjoy when you put them out. So
Yeah.
definitely stay connected with him there. He's active on Twitter and Instagram.
Mhm.
Anything else you want to tell the people before you go?
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing I would be remiss to not talk about my other podcast since we got into talking about politics. I do have a podcast with my wife called the Prophetic Imagination Station. And that doesn't have so much to do with psychology, but we look at media, like evangelical media, and from our childhood, and we try to understand like, so how did we get from like growing up with this to like 81% of our community voting for Trump? So that's kind of our our thing. So right now we're going through the Chronicles of Narnia, and looking at like, you know, what's there, and reviewing that because that was something that we grew up with. But looking now where we're at, like, is this something that's still helpful? Is it something we should keep around? So, but it hits on some of the themes we talked about today. So I was like, you know, got to mention that too.
Oh, yeah, and I'll put that in the show notes. And I think, with the whole media and film, a lot of the way that we think about life, a lot of it's
Mhm.
related to what we kind of were exposed to growing up. So
Exactly.
especially
Yeah.
when it comes to relationships,
Hmm.
I think that so that's good. I'm gonna make sure to put that
All
in
right.
there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on, and I love your show. And
Of course.
yeah, I just always, you see me like putting it out on Twitter sometimes because I'm just really glad that it exists. So yeah, it's great.
Thank
Well,
you.
thanks
I
so much.
appreciate you. And tell your wife I'm going to be reaching out to her. Don't
All
hide
right.
her from me because I do want to talk about that book.
All right. Sounds good. That'd be great.
Bye, Crispin.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
That was amazing. I connected with him on Twitter, and I started following his stuff, and I really enjoy it. He's a really good follow. So he has two podcasts, and if you go to his website, crispinmayfield.com, you'll be able to find both. And then if you're listening to this on the audio, you can just click on it in the show notes. So we'll be back Friday. I'm sorry, I just lied. We'll be back Thursday, December 17th, talking about relationships. If anything we ever say, thank you. If anything we ever say kind of resonates for you, like whether I'm whoever I'm talking to in this specific case, we talked about different things. Don't just stop here. Don't like really start to work on being intentional about your changes. One thing I wanted to highlight that he talked about is this idea of like creating your own rituals and practices, especially if you're somebody that really wants to have a more spiritual connection. I think that it's important. I do believe that some of the ways that we may have been brought up have kind of hindered our growth, especially this attachment style. I mean, this was what like a 45-minute podcast, and we've learned so much about attachment. Imagine if we really start to educate ourselves about it the same way we do when our favorite like singer or reality star something happens and then we get so engulfed in it and that's not doing anything for us. So the things that you do find yourself struggling in, like you owe yourself the opportunity to understand it better because we have no excuses. We have the media at our fingertips. If you're listening or watching me now, you understand how to work the internet. So definitely like really work on being intentional about looking at what you can do to help create changes in your life. So if you are watching me on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. If you're watching me on Facebook, share, Periscope, share. Find me on celestetherapist.com. You can find me there. You can find me on all social media platforms. If you want to be a guest on the show, email me info@celestetherapist.com. Anything else? I think that's it. I'll see you guys Thursday. And until next time, I'll talk to you.
Smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity. And make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now